Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanksgiving Eve. You guys are dedicated to blockchain. But you're here with Legal, which is a movement of technologists, lawyers, policy hackers. We're now 70 chapters strong, about 8,000 people around the world, so you're part of a growing movement. And thanks to other meetup holders for helping advertise these events that we've been holding around the blockchain space. Blockchain is obviously one of several things that we as legal hackers care about from a tech law and policy perspective. We've got another event in a week, which is all about freeing the law, and that's going to be much more looking at some use cases around how we hack open all of the court records. There's a very cool speaker, Mike Listener, who's going to be kicking off that panel event, and that's going to be a new series that we're setting up around freeing the law. But this is our blockchain series, and I think we're about 6 events in now so through the course of the year. So if you're coming back, thank you for coming back. I want to just make a few very short announcements from a few different people before I hand over to Raphael, who's the main event this evening, and we're all going to learn about asset tokenization, which is one of the incredibly cool parts of what I think blockchain is going to enable us to do. And whether it's legal or not. But I want to hand over, first of all, to our host, Tim. So Tim Nichols is the managing director of this beautiful space here at the Impact Hub. I run a company called legal.io. We moved in recently into a beautiful office here, and we've just been able to take advantage of this incredible community. So Tim, if you tell us a bit more about the space.
Definitely. My name is Tim Nichols.
Tim, you stand here.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks all for coming out. The Impact Hub, have you guys been here? Anybody been here before? Got one over here. I know Jesse in the back there is a member. Yeah, so we're a community of social environmental entrepreneurs, people that work in corporations, people that work for startups, people that work in the government, all become members here just to be around other organizations that are interested in trying to figure out a better way to build a more equitable economy. We focus on that here, but we also have spaces at 100 locations around the world. Most major cities have an Impact Hub, and we have just opened this space about 6 months ago, so we're just growing it. And if you're interested in membership, I left some cards over by the name tags, and we can chat a little bit more about that. If you've got a startup that you think fits what we're trying to do here, we want you to be part of it, be part of the community, and we're just growing it at this time. So we have this whole building, we've got a backyard space, so we want you to come join. And yeah. We're happy to have Tony here. We're happy to have this event here, and we'll be doing a lot more around this stuff in the coming year. So join us, grab me if you have any questions, and catch up.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's the Impact Hub. This is an epic community and space. Next, I want to hand over to a legal hacker co-organizer who's all the way from Boston, who recently held this incredible event around AI and blockchain at the MIT Media Lab. Pulled together some incredible people. MIT is super interesting, obviously, because there's amazing people there, but they don't have a law school. So it's interesting when some of the stuff they're doing comes, butts up against legal issues. And so we've got people like Daz at MIT setting up something incredible called the MIT Legal Forum. We had our first meeting at MIT a couple of weeks back, and Daz is going to tell us a little bit more about what's coming up with that very cool project.
That's right. Yeah, thanks, man. Great, and perhaps my most proud affiliation, however, is co-chair of Massachusetts Legal Hackers, which is a place where we collaborate on hacking the law in many ways. And so the major thing that when I was asked, is there an announcement or an update that would make sense to give tonight? I think it's something that hasn't been really publicly announced yet, but it's something that we cooked up at the MIT Legal Forum when a bunch of us got together and we did breakout groups and ideation and a few iterations of people suggesting ideas to talk about, and then forming new breakout groups in the afternoon and then the next day. So one of the things that popped out of that was a discussion group and a proposal from GE's counsel's office and Marcy Harris and legal hackers from all around to basically have a X prize of types for computational law. And the idea is to work with a city that is willing to refactor like their charter or like their sovereign Magna Carta so that it's computational, it's algorithmic, and then to look at picking maybe an area of traditional municipal regulation and policy, like traffic and parking, tax, schools, maybe that would be a big chunk, and then see if that could be expressed, or some aspect of it could be expressed in a way that is data-driven and computational, by design, and adaptive, and just to begin to get a sense of what would that kind of governance look like, what would the city council and the managers be, is it like parameters and thresholds that they're setting at this point, get some data through it by doing maybe a game, like a simulation, perhaps incentivize people with tokens or something like that, so we can get some user data going and figure out the legal framework. The main thing is figure out what is the statistical model, what does the platform look like, what is the data driving, and how do we get that constitution or that like philosophy in a kernel, whether it's utilitarian or happiness or economic development, and then be able to pop in like modularly what the administrative kind of like codes literally would be. And then kind of rock it out as like some rapid prototype experiment. So probably next step will be we'll invite our friends back to MIT Media Lab and do like a charrette, a design session with GE and Media Lab people, some law school people. We do seem to be shy one law school, so we've been reaching out lately to our friends, and maybe there's a collaboration in the offing.
Well, yeah, so first off, if you're interested at all in any of that stuff, then I encourage you to reach out to Dazzler. This charrette in January is going to be part of a course which is going to be available online as well. It's around the whole range of computational law issues, smart contracts, machine sort of readable regulation, and then ultimately computational regulation.
Right, and assets in particular, like identification and tracking of intangible assets, but that are digital assets. So looking at personal data as a new asset class and some deep gap in IFRS tax treatment and some other stuff there. So it's going to be fun for everybody in this course.
And yes,
tax is fun.
Tax is fun. And so the other piece that we're hacking together is this East-West Coast collaboration. So we're getting stuff going at Stanford Law School around blockchain as well.
Oh,
and so if you're interested, and that's primarily going to be around looking at what the regulations are, how we help educate regulators, how we help educate counsel around blockchain and what potential there is. So so come and talk to me about getting involved more locally as well, down at Stanford, especially if you're coming more from the legal side of things, or if you have particularly knotty legal issues that you want people helping out with.
All my legal issues. So we're going to be doing this computational law course at MIT. You can sign up at law.MIT.edu/learning, and you can learn more, and you can watch this in the future at MITlegalforum.org. So those of you that want to tweet out the thing that we're about to hear, or let people hear what's already happened, it's MITlegalforum.org. And you scroll down, and I just chuck the live stream embedded at the bottom of the page there. And then maybe a pop-up course, if we're lucky, at Stanford Law School that Tony would be in charge of. So then we bring our denizens from the Media Lab and our other community out here and participate in the course here. And then in some informal, groovy, self-organizing way, together we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That's a good one. So the format of tonight is basically going to be, we're going to have about a 20-minute talk from Raphael, initially going over this topic. He's going to tell us a bit more about Trust Token. And then it's pretty much going to be an open discussion where questions back and forth. We're going to go around, I think, or Raphael's going to go around and just do a very quick survey of who we have in the room, what people are comfortable with. But I imagine this isn't going to be 101. We're going to kind of jump in fairly deep. But I imagine Raphael's good with questions being asked along the way as well. So with that, unless anybody else has something they want to add before we get going. And again, sorry, this is all being live streamed. So if you want a particular question that you don't want to ask as part of this, we'll shut this down at a certain point this evening and we can have sort of more off-the-record discussions if you want to do that. But unless there's anything else, I'm going to hand it over to Raphael Cosman.
Cool. I'm Raphael. Great to meet you all. Quick background on me. I had the opportunity to learn how to program when I was very young in 4th grade on the TI-84 basic graphing calculator. Does anyone remember those? Yeah. The graphic calculators? Then I went to Stanford to study computer science. I had the opportunity to work at Palantir doing AI and machine learning research, doing crime prediction and helping law enforcement agencies to allocate their resources. And then work at Google Brain, which is like Google's AI and machine learning research division. Then I left Google. Me and a couple of friends had been very into blockchain. We spent some time just hacking on projects, traveling around the world, and then ended up working on this project, Trust Token, which I'll tell you about tonight. And we are very much focused on solving the problem of real-world asset tokenization. So just to get a sense of kind of what everyone's backgrounds are and how deep we should go, I don't want to go too fast or too slow. Can I get a sense of like, okay, who owns like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or another cryptocurrency? Okay, almost everyone. All right, who has like written a smart contract, built a blockchain, works at a blockchain company? Oh, wow, all right, a lot, like half. And who has a background in law, or is an attorney, was an attorney? Cool, okay, so it seems like about half blockchain people, half law people, some overlap there. That's great. All right, so I'm gonna try to make this pretty relevant to everyone in the room. Let me know if I'm going too slow or too fast. You can definitely jump in with questions at any time. Cool, so this presentation is gonna have 3 main sections. First is, what is asset tokenization? Second one is a case study of how not to do asset tokenization with a real live example that we're seeing right now. And the third one is how to actually legally do asset tokenization. So what is asset tokenization? Who's familiar with the concept of real-world asset tokenization so far? Cool. Maybe Noah, could you tell me, can you define real-world asset tokenization?
Whereas Bitcoin and Ethereum are tokens that exist on-chain and derive their value just from on-chain transactions. A tokenized asset refers to some value that's in the real world, like some property or commodity or something like that. And there's this tenuous connection between the on-chain token and off-chain.
Great description. Yes?
You say that you're tokenizing the electrical power with the Bitcoin before.
Could you say you're tokenizing? What's your name, by the way?
Misha.
Misha. And by the way, when you say a question, feel free to say your name. We'd like to get to know you. So Misha asked, could you say you're tokenizing electrical power via Bitcoin? Good question. You could, but not in a very useful way. Because it's not like I can take a Bitcoin and say like, hey, give me back my electrical power, right? So as Noah said, Noah used the phrase tentative connection between the token and the real world asset. So Noah used the phrase tentative connection between the token and the real world asset, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about today, is can you have a solid connection between tokens and real world assets? So in general, tokenization of assets is when you issue a cryptocurrency that corresponds to fractional ownership of a real world asset. So for example, if you have a rental property, you might issue like rental property coin. And let's say you have 100 of those, each one corresponds to ownership of 1% of the rental property, and might give its owner 1% of the rental income. Does that make sense so far? Cool, so why is this useful? The 3 main reasons. One is you can capture liquidity premiums on otherwise illiquid assets. So real estate, for example, there's $217 trillion of real estate. It's the single largest real asset class in the world, and it's almost completely liquid. Right now, as an investor, to get access to it, you gotta buy an entire piece of real estate and then you get all the rental income, right? It's very difficult to have a liquid exchange where I can buy 1% of this rental property on the West Coast, 2% of this on the East Coast, 3% of this rental property in Paris. Very difficult to do today. What's up? Is it Jim?
You can, yeah.
It's what?
Legally heavy.
Legally heavy, exactly.
You buy your portfolio, shares in the portfolio.
Exactly. Great point, Jim. Great point. So there are things like REITs. Who's familiar with REITs? Real estate investment trusts. So REITs became legal, and this is I think what Jim's talking about. REITs became legal in 1960. President signed a law allowing for REITs. They're basically these big companies that own tons of real estate. They can get publicly listed, and they allow you as an investor to get exposure to a tiny fraction of thousands and thousands of properties. REITs are very difficult to set up. They have a lot of management costs. A REIT has to be huge if it's going to be able to actually be listed on an exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange. So,
and you can do a private partnership.
And you can do private partnership. So there are other ways of doing it. That's a great point. And we'll in a couple of slides, we'll get to why exactly is the blockchain helpful here. So second reason tokenization is interesting is because of network effects. So assets like the royalties from songs, movies, TV shows, books are interesting to tokenize because you can imagine, like, Tony, if you owned 1% of your favorite artist's song, right? Or Brian, if you owned 2% of like the next Star Wars movie, all of a sudden, you as a Star Wars fan are incentivized to go and like tweet about it, blog about it, write a Facebook post, get your friends more invested in it, right? And so certain assets can capture network effects because they're inherently viral. And if people own a fraction of that asset, then they can benefit from increasing the value of that asset. Final reason is that it allows for global access both to capital and to investment opportunities. So right now, living in the United States, it's very easy to lose track of the fact that we have the best access to capital, especially here in the Silicon Valley. Best access to capital in almost the entire world, and some of the highest quality investment opportunities. I've had friends from India say, hey, could you help me buy Tesla stock? Because it's difficult to buy Tesla stock if you live in India. One thing we don't realize is just how difficult it actually is to get access to capital and investment opportunities around the world. So those are three large reasons for why tokenization is powerful. Oh, don't install. Cool. So I think we've touched on a couple of assets that benefit from tokenization. Can anyone shout out a couple more? I think we've touched on real estate, gold. What else? Your time, like your future income. That's a tokenizable asset. Great point. Startup stocks, extremely illiquid, right? Energy.
Municipal bonds.
Municipal bonds, yep. I'm actually talking with the CEO of Neighborly. And you work on it, you work for it, right? Cool. So any other assets? IP, arts. Right. Great. Okay, so those are some of the applications of why this could be interesting. Now, one question that Jim brought up is, why is the blockchain necessary? Because you could already do these things before blockchain. Like 10 years ago, with the internet but without the blockchain. 5 years ago, you could have easily tokenized a bunch of these assets, right? And there are actually startups that are doing this, like Point.com and a couple of others. So what specifically does the blockchain bring that unlocks this potential? So it's two main things. One is access to investors. So if you are making let's imagine you were trying to make a startup which tokenizes real estate. For example, it's like you're going to buy properties, they're going to be on your platform, and then investors can invest in them and trade them, right? What's the problem? What you want is to offer liquidity premiums. You want to buy a $100,000 house, sell it to investors for $120,000 because it's worth more to them if it's liquid, right? But you can't do that until you have a lot of investors. And so friends that I've talked to at companies like AngelList, Republic, Funders Club, etc., they have exactly this two-sided marketplace problem. There are the assets that they're investing in, be it real estate or startups. Then there are the actual investors. And you don't have significant liquidity until you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of investors on your platform. And so that's a very difficult hurdle to overcome before you can actually offer any liquidity premiums for the underlying assets. Second major thing that blockchain largely solves that just because there already are a huge pool of investors that are trading digital assets of these kinds, and anyone can plug in a new asset, right? These standards are like ERC20 are completely open source. So anyone could create an ERC20 token, list it on a variety of exchanges, and investors could start trading it tomorrow. So second thing that blockchains provide is a lot of infrastructure that you need to have a high quality liquid market. So this includes exchanges, high frequency traders, algorithmic market makers, and much more. And if I, as a trader, come onto your privatized platform where you're tokenizing real estate, I'll say, hey, well, where's my market depth charts, right? Where are the hundreds of other traders? Where's the order book? I need all of this infrastructure to actually be able to come and trade those assets. And that's already been created for the blockchain because it's an open source financial platform that anyone can plug an exchange into. Anyone can high frequency trade. And so you already have a whole bunch of infrastructure that's been built out for trading digital assets. Cool. So that is the section on what asset tokenization is. Any questions or thoughts on that? No. Yes.
Can you describe the network effects?
Absolutely, Terrence. can I describe the network effects example? So let's give a very specific example. What's your favorite song, Terrence?
I did it my way.
I did it my way. Okay. All right. So let's say you owned 1% of I Did It My Way, and let's say you have a big following on Twitter, right? Now maybe that asset was worth $100,000. Maybe it's worth $1 million, right? Let's say you have a big following on Twitter, right? You buy 1% of that song. You tweet out to your followers, hey, everybody, I love this song. You all should listen to it, right? They also go start listening on Spotify, sharing it with their followers, and so on, right? The song, the asset itself becomes more valuable, right? Maybe it becomes $100,000 more valuable. And you, because you own 1% of it, have now captured $1,000 of that value. So you've captured a fraction of the actual value that you've created for the asset. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
You're basically saying through more usage, the tokens get more valuable. That's the song share.
Exactly. You're incentivized to increase the value of the song or whatever the asset is. Cool. Okay, so let's dive into how not to tokenize assets. So who's familiar with a cryptocurrency called Tether? Cool. Okay. So Tether's been in the news a lot lately. Just for background for people that haven't heard of Tether, Tether is the 20th largest cryptocurrency in the world. It has a market capitalization of $670 million as of today. It is tokenized USD. What does that mean? That means that Tether, as a private company, they've got a bank account, and in that bank account, they've got some money, and they have tokens that are flying around in blockchain space, and those tokens, in theory, correspond to ownership, fractional ownership of this bank account, 1 for 1. 1 token, $1. Does that make sense so far? Cool. So what they promise is you can take a token, you can come to them, and they'll give you $1, or you can give them $1, and they'll mint a new token, and they'll give it to you. Yeah, what's up?
They don't promise that.
They don't actually promise that. Good point. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Cool. So they've been in the news a lot recently. Recently, they got hacked for 30 million tethers. Like 30 million of this. Like they have this token that they're minting, which corresponds to the money in their bank account. They had 30 million of those tokens stolen recently, which is pretty bad. Because now it's a question like, oh, if those are in circulation, and someone then can someone then use those stolen tokens to now redeem the actual money out of their bank account? They also have been in the news lately because their market capitalization is skyrocketing. So in the last 14 days, they printed 150 million new tokens. And each one of those tokens, in theory, corresponds to $1 in their bank account. So they claim that in the last 14 days, they've just got 150 million more dollars in their bank account. Now, the issue is, you don't actually know if they do. So they're supposed to have audits. The last time they had an audit was way back here when their market capitalization was $40 million. And they have like an audit saying we have $40 million in our bank account. Now their bank account supposedly has $670 million. But there have been 0 audits since 40 to 670. So a lot of people are wondering, is the money actually there? So additionally, in their terms of service, they make it very clear there is no contractual agreement to actually redeem their tethers for US dollars. They so far have been doing that. They have been redeeming them, but there's no legal requirement for them to continue to do so. So if tomorrow they said, hey, I'm sorry, we actually walked away with all the money, then you couldn't even sue them. They're completely within their legal rights to do that. Cool. Does the situation make sense so far? Yeah, what's up?
Why are people converting into tethers?
Great question. Great question. Why are we giving? All right, so Sandra, let me explain why. The reason why is because there's actually a huge market need for tethers. That's why. And the reason why is because if you are a trader, if you're a crypto trader, and let's say you're long on cryptocurrencies, maybe you're $100 million long on cryptocurrencies, and you think right now that crypto is going to go down. Let's say this week you think it's going to go down. So you want to not be long temporarily. So what do? It's difficult to turn your crypto back into fiat, right? That requires like getting it into your bank account, 3 to 5 days, wire transfers. It's difficult, right? But Tether is a cryptocurrency. It's very easy to get your crypto out of Bitcoin, out of Ethereum, out of whatever it is, into Tethers, right? And so now you can pull $100 million into Tethers, wait for the market to go down, and then when you think it's going to go back up again, then you can go back into crypto. So it's very useful for traders. But you can imagine it's not just useful for traders, it's useful for other things too. Like if you wanted to make like a remittance application that uses cryptocurrency in the back end, you don't necessarily want the users of your remittance application to be exposed to the volatility of a Bitcoin or an Ethereum or another cryptocurrency. You might want to have a stable currency like something backed by a real world asset, like US dollars, that your remittance users can actually use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I'm only concerned like if someone has that terminal service, then I would concern like even if I want to go going down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Great question. People are still holding Tethers, even if it's just for short periods of time, because they might think, well, okay, it probably won't be today that Tether will crash, or if it does, I'll get out quickly. I'll sell it fast enough, right? So that's the situation we're in right now. Yeah, what's up?
Question. So don't you need to be a licensed money transmitter to move money?
Great question, Dad. Don't you need to be a licensed money transmitter? We will get
Which
to
is like a bank typically.
Right.
Or Western Union, but it's painful to get that.
Right.
So when there's a one-to-one relationship between the token and the dollar, that would be the money part, wouldn't it?
Great question.
Yeah, but even Bitcoin is the money part nowadays in the US at least.
So to be a licensed transmitter, don't you need a license? Do they have one?
I think that they don't.
It isn't?
I think that's why I'm trying to.
That's the question I guess I'm asking.
Yeah.
So I'm asserting it this way to make you say why.
But also, do we know who that bank is? They actually said.
No, they don't say which bank they're working with.
Basically, Bitcoin is operating in they have Tether.
I think we should call on you if you want to speak.
Cool. Okay.
According to my sources here, Bitfinex deposits for protecting the Tether are at a bank in looks like the Czech Republic.
Maybe. It's not clear. Could be the Czech Republic. Some people think Taiwan. It's not completely clear. Cool. Let's move on, but I'll take more questions at the end and we can definitely discuss afterwards. Okay, so that's the overall the situation with Tether. So the three primary issues that they face. One is it's not legally enforceable. There's no actual legal connection between the tokens and the assets. Second is there's no audits. And third is that there's no insurance. And so as a token holder, you have very, very little trust that the assets are actually there and that you will actually be able to redeem them. Okay, so third part of this talk, how to legally tokenize assets. So my team is working on this problem, and there are three things that we're focusing on. One is how to have a legally enforceable connection between the tokens and the assets. Second one is how to have a clean audit trail for everything that happens with the underlying assets. And third one is how to have insurance over the assets so that the token holders are not taking on the risk of someone misappropriating the assets. Cool. So the way we do this is with a special kind of legal entity called a smart trust. Who's familiar with a legal trust? Cool. So a trust is a legal contract between a grantor and a fiduciary, saying that the fiduciary, they're the trustee of the trust, they will manage the assets on the behalf of the beneficiaries. Cool. So we got a couple of roles here. In this case, we are using a trust to represent the legal relationship between the token holders, who are the beneficiaries of this trust, and the fiduciary, who's kind of like Tether, they're the ones that are actually managing and owning the assets. So the smart trust is a special kind of trust which references, in its legal language, it references a smart contract and specifies that the trustee of the trust is that the smart contract is going to give him or her.
Interesting.
So, right, interesting idea. So, and you may have seen other projects where they're trying to kind of merge smart contracts and legal contracts, and this is a very specific case of that. So the purpose is that you could take you could take an asset like a house, you could retitle it into a trust, the trust is connected to a smart contract. A smart contract can issue tokens, which can be traded by token holders. And you could have rules like, for example, like when the rental property generates income, it will be sent to the smart contract and then distributed proportionally to the token holders. Or, for example, the token holders, you could say, they might vote, and if 70% of them vote to sell the underlying asset, then the fiduciary will sell the underlying asset. Yeah, what's up?
So it's like a blockchain MBS.
It's like a what?
It's like a blockchain-based MBS. Same way. So it's like a equity of a fund, which will hold like real estate assets, which are then just distributed among all the persons which want to buy it. And at the end, just it's the same, but just put on the blockchain. It's not on the paper.
That's well said. So it's kind of like a blockchain-based REIT. That's the right idea. And what the blockchain provides is, one, it gives an easy way to have liquid trading of tokens. You know, investors, exchanges, etc. So that's already built. Second thing is it provides this auditability, which is crucial. So let's say, for example, in the example I just gave, let's say 70% of the token holders have a vote, and they say, hey, we want to sell this asset, right? Now the fiduciary legally has to actually follow that instruction and sell the asset. And if they don't, there's a public record that everyone can see, which says, hey, they voted, the smart contract said to sell the asset, you didn't sell the asset, and you can take them to court, and you can say, hey, you violated the terms of this trust agreement because you didn't actually do what it said, right? So, and if you don't have a publicly verifiable proof that that instruction was issued, then you don't really necessarily have a case against the fiduciary of this trust. What's up, Jim?
Public, that's if you can find the party you're trying to seek to enforce against. It doesn't need to be public.
If you can find the party you're trying to enforce against.
Let us imagine, so what I'm seeing is essentially an electronic record. And I can imagine that being used in a trust case, I can imagine it being used in a partnership case, I can imagine it being used in a corporation, i.e. a startup, as opposed to all the binders we end up with on our shelves of minute books and all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
It's essentially electronic record.
That's
now,
right.
The advantage of using cryptographic proof of the steps in the thing is that it's hard to falsify. But if you imagine, say, the situation of a startup, if it involves physical people, and I'm assuming it would, then all you need is for that community to have access to the blockchain.
That's a great point, yes. That's right. So you could imagine doing a similar thing on a private or permission blockchain as opposed to on a public blockchain.
And you would have the same essential proof element of it. And to the extent that you automate the functionality of it, you'd have some of the efficiency benefits of that as well, without having the loss of price.
Right. That's exactly right. Cool. So the stack overall looks like this. You've got assets that are legally owned by a trust. The trust is legally controlled by the smart contract, and the smart contract can actually issue tokens that are traded by token holders. And this gives you, and the fiduciary who is actually managing the assets, they can take instructions from the smart contract and also can upload any documentation to the blockchain saying, hey, like, here are the records showing that I'm, managing the asset in a completely trustworthy way. So that any token holder, anyone who's thinking of buying a token, knows what they're getting, and they can trust that the assets are real and that are being managed appropriately. Cool. Yeah, what's up?
Okay.
Sam.
My question is, what happens? This sounds great for like the US, where you get paid to be that.
That's a great question, Sam. So U.S. trusts can hold assets anywhere in the world, but there is a question of could you actually enforce that? And what you would need is to have governments with extradition treaties to the U.S. or use local trust law. But really, the way that that's right is another possibility. a final way that you can have trust in situations like that, like if I wanted to buy, let's say, 1% of a rental property in Uzbekistan, right? And there's like some Uzbek fiduciary that is managing this property. The question is, how do I actually trust that there's a real property there and a real fiduciary and this thing isn't a scam, right? And the way that I would do that is partly just through insurance. So if an insurer on the blockchain, they're going to actually tie up a certain amount of cryptocurrency that you can see. It's locked up. Like it's a $100,000 house, there might be $100,000 of insurance capital tied up on the blockchain, and a third-party mediator that if there are any issues with this asset or with this fiduciary, the third-party mediator can take this money and give it to the token holders. And so as long as that mediator is trustworthy, then it's actually the insurer who's taking on the liability and not the token holders. Does that make sense? And so insurers are incentivized to vet the fiduciaries carefully, and then because they're the ones that are actually taking on the risk if the fiduciaries are dishonest. Cool. So part of the structure here is having a decentralized network of fiduciaries. Right now, we're just working with fiduciaries in the US, but we'll be working eventually with fiduciaries worldwide, and a decentralized network of insurers to vet those fiduciaries and stake money on them on the blockchain.
Perfect answer. But that raises another question that ties to things. So it sounds great if that fiduciary is like a bank or someone that's like they're dependent on their reputation or their trust to do other things. But if it's some random dude who's gonna back your Uzbek land holdings,
right?
Like that may not work. So, like you may or may not be able to ensure that. So.
But it's gonna be complicated. Like smart contract, so you're gonna have a problem in the real world that you can trust into. Blockchain, you can't trust into because you just see it's on the chain.
So that dude in Uzbekistan would be putting up his own cryptocurrencies to back his own.
Yeah.
He basically be self-insured.
But I mean, are there specific vetting criteria to put the question around how you imagine selecting the network, decentralized or otherwise?
Great question. Yeah, so right now we're only working with professional fiduciaries, like professional trust companies. Their full-time job is operating as the trustee for other people's trusts. They generally manage hundreds of millions to billions of dollars of other people's money, and they know how to do all of the accounting for trusts already. And they can take those accounting documents, put them on the blockchain, and token holders can see those. We may want to expand it beyond that, but certainly anyone who is managing these assets needs to be able to do thorough accounting and needs to be very trustworthy. So it will ultimately be insurers that will take on the liability if they don't do a good job. Cool. Let me go on, and I'll take a few. I know there are a lot of questions. I'll take a few more questions at the end. So briefly, I want to talk about tokenization and securities laws. So there are two main securities laws that you need to. Two main securities laws that you can use when you're issuing tokens, Reg D and Reg CF. So who here is like invested in an ICO at some point? So a couple of us, all right? So you've probably seen some ICOs, they just like put an Ethereum address and they say send money, right? Some ICOs, like you may have heard of Filecoin, are using Reg D. And Reg D is kind of an exception to the normal SEC securities process, which says you don't have to do as much of kind of like the disclosure documentation around the asset if you are only selling to accredited investors. So those are people with a certain net worth who make a certain amount of money. And the other exception to the SEC rules is Reg CF. That's a recent crowdfunding rule that came out in 2016. And that one basically says as long as you're selling less than $1 million, then you can sell to both accredited or unaccredited investors. And those are the two main regulations that people are using right now to issue new cryptocurrencies. There's also Reg A, Reg A+, and Reg S, which may be used more in the future, but are not used as much right now just because they oftentimes involve kind of more documentation. So if you want to dive into that, there's a ton of legal stuff you probably don't want to know about there. But that's basically the security situation around this stuff. Cool. So I'm going to kind of wrap up. I know there are probably a lot of questions. I'll take a couple, and then we'll have time to discuss afterwards. But I guess a couple of closing thoughts. So one is the legal asset tokenization is possible today, but it's still very, very new and requires new kinds of legal entities, new kinds of offerings that folks aren't necessarily very comfortable with yet. And so we may see over the next couple of years a lot more work in this area, a lot more offerings of these type. Questions that I'd like for folks to think about for the rest of the night, and feel free to talk about these, are kind of what are the remaining issues economically, legally, around tokenizing real-world assets, and what are the societal impacts that we can expect to see if a significant fraction of our assets become tokenized over the next couple of years or a couple of decades. That's it. So I'd like to take a couple of questions. Feel free to come catch me afterwards, write to me, tweet at me, let me know if there's a topic you're interested in. This is something that I'm really excited about, my team is really excited about. Yeah, so let's take a couple questions. Yeah.
Hey, Peter. So did I get it correctly that if I become a token, that I am then beneficiary?
Exactly. You are a beneficiary of a trust.
So then what's interesting and potentially a legal challenge is that I've seen some very nasty family disputes, right? Where you have money's being paid out over time. Usually 1, 2, 3 parties that can be unhappy and sue. So here you're at least having the potential, and it's my legal mind is trying to swallow the risk of like a couple of million people,
right,
who can all try to drain the resources of trust by raising, threats of litigation, which costs money. I just thought that was interesting because that seems to be a challenge. The fiduciary would need to be a very professional and certain one to take on such a novel thing. Otherwise, it's not super interesting.
Yeah, great question, Peter. And so there's absolutely a question here of now you have a trust with potentially tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of beneficiaries, all the token holders. And each one of them has the right to bring a suit if they believe that the fiduciary is mismanaging the assets in any way. And so that's definitely, it's definitely a question and a challenge. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting talk, thank you. I mean, there's obviously so many potential use cases for this. Like, what you said, remember what you're seeing, where do you think, like, who is most likely to drive which use cases come first? Is it what the trustees want to tokenize? Is it on the demand side, or is it coming from somewhere else?
Good question, Rodrigo. So what's going to drive which assets come first?
Right, exactly.
Tokenize first.
Yeah, just from what you're seeing.
Great question. So from what we're seeing, there's a huge amount of demand right now for a better stablecoin. And that could just be tokenized US dollars, it could be tokenized gold, it could be a basket of tokenized real estate. But any sort of stable currency to replace Tether, just because there's a tremendous amount of fear around Tether right now. And it's like, it has $670 million of market cap, right? And that means that there's a $670 million market cap opportunity for anyone who can offer a better alternative right now, right? And there are a variety of ways to create that, right? Like a basket of tokenized real estate, for example, would be a fairly stable cryptocurrency. I think that I'd say that overall, the two types of assets that benefit most are highly illiquid assets, like real estate, startup equity, and assets that have network effects. So things like songs, music, TV shows, and so on. Yes, Andrew.
So this Reg Z and Reg S, there are big chances of money invested by each investor.
There what?
Big chance to find a Reg Z is one of the size, basically, but when I talk about millions of users, it should be somehow spread between this 1 million chance of money to let's say 1,000.
Good question. So Reg D and Reg CF are ways of doing initial coin offerings. So maybe let's say, Andrew, you tokenize a rental property and you sell it to maybe like the 20, 30 people in this room, right? They could then, depending on exactly the type of offering, there may be a certain waiting period, like 1 year, but they could then later go and list those on exchanges and start trading them. And so that's how you could do, you might do an initial coin offering to 20, 30, or 100 or 200 people, and then they might trade them, and it might end up in the hands of thousands or tens of thousands of people. That's right. Oh,
maybe some government guy will say it's.
Oh, Reg D and Reg CF are actually types of public offerings, but after a Reg D or Reg CF, then the tokens might be traded on an exchange and could end up in the hands of many, many more people than were participating in the initial offering.
When exchange accepts these guys can just retail.
Yes, there are some nuances about the offering. So, for example, with Reg CF, the tokens can't be resold to unaccredited investors within 1 year, but they can be resold to accredited investors within the first year. So there are some nuances about when they can be sold, but generally the answer is yes. That's right. Yeah.
So the Reg D and Reg CF only applies to those tokens which qualify for securities, right? They
That's
don't
exactly
really apply to something that qualifies.
That's right. And so you could even imagine tokenizing real-world assets where the tokens are actually like utility tokens. Like, for example, imagine if you had like a timeshare where like you can sell off tokens. The tokens can be like used to like reserve a month of this timeshare. So that might be classified as a utility token as opposed to a security token, in which case you could bypass Reg D and Reg CF offerings altogether. And that would be very helpful. But many types of tokens would be securities.
Otherwise, just ban USAPs and be fine.
Not really. Not really, because there are plenty of other countries with different securities laws that do need to take into account.
Any like nightmare situations that you see technically in approaching this project?
Good question. Nightmare situations technically.
Yeah. Like downstream impacts on like you're dealing with physical realities.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really like perform.
Right.
Smart contract bugs.
Smart contract bugs is a huge one. That's like if you had like imagine you tokenized real estate and there was a bug in the smart contract and some hacker just could have complete control and ownership over that. That's huge. Forking is a great question. Like if you did this on Ethereum and Ethereum were to fork, and there's a question, okay, now you have two distinct sets of token holders and each could argue we are the real beneficiaries of this asset, and it might not be clear in the fork which one is the real one, right? So it might be safer to use something like Stellar, which has some properties that make it much more difficult to fork. What's up, Jim?
As long as you're dealing with real people, you've got a trustee, so it'd be an argument that essentially would be in front of the trustee, made by the trustee, made by the trustee, submitting the dispute to a lawsuit or something like that. So you have a path forward all of that.
Yes.
I presume that you have signed legal documents, the Ethereum and Tweetbridge stuff. You have signed documents that put the asset on the blockchain and signed documents that take the asset off the blockchain. That's the way you think of this.
Good question. It's not quite. What we have is like a legal entity, the trust, which is going to basically take ownership of the assets. And so from the perspective of the US government or from the perspective of a bank, the asset is just owned by the trust. And that's a completely normal thing legally. The trust is a little bit unusual in that it references a smart contract on the blockchain. Does that make sense?
But you've got to deal with one of the account holders, right?
It's actually the smart contract which deals with those. So the trust just references a smart contract.
You've got no text in it. You've got no description of and will stay insured. Or and this is what happened if you have a flood. You don't have an insurance policy that has to flow through to the investors. There's nothing signed from the investors.
Good question. There is nothing signed by the investors. The investors are just token holders, and the trust just references a smart contract and just says, hey, the token holders of that smart contract are the beneficiaries of this trust, and the fiduciary has to follow the instructions of that smart contract. Good question. Let's chat afterwards. We can go through some of the legal details. Cool. I'm going to take just one more question. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question similar to what Jim was asking, so just at whatever level of abstraction you want to handle it. to me, it seems like the major innovation here is utilizing fiduciaries. Now you've got the whole set of fiduciary duties and a great body of law and financial. You get a lot going for you once you have fiduciaries that are owning the assets and following instructions. And the part that the smart contract does seems to me is ensuring you've got coherent, objective, and publicly verifiable methods and mechanisms to identify the instructions to the fiduciary, so that they don't have to wonder, is it this email or that, and they can maybe get out of the buzzsaw of some litigation. My question kind of related to exploring like what the role and the functions, and then maybe the usability of fiduciaries in this role are. So someone asked, like, how do you select fiduciaries? You said, I guess one boundary now is in the US. But I was wondering, like, is there when I think of fiduciaries and fiduciary law, it's been some decades since I had to do that, but it was kind of loose, like there's not like a single role in the United States where you're a fiduciary or you're not. Like, there's some folks that are held to some sets of fiduciary duties, like, federally chartered banks and credit unions, and lawyers have a certain set, and they're phrased differently. But how do you say even who is a fiduciary, who isn't a fiduciary, for purposes of achieving the role and outcomes that you seek in this kind of niche context of follow the instructions of token holders? Like, you have like a list of fiduciaries, or you just kind of just like figure it out on a case-by-case basis?
Great question. Cool. So there are a couple questions in there. So for starters, we're citing these trusts in Nevada and South Dakota because those are the two jurisdictions in the United States with the friendliest laws for trusts of this type. They allow, for example, for dynasty trusts that can last for like 365 years plus. Other states oftentimes require, for example, that trusts can't outlive just like an individual person. So that's why we've chosen those two states. There are a bunch of reasons why they're the friendliest, Nevada and South Dakota. And so the folks that we are working with as fiduciaries right now for these trusts are just professional trust companies in those two states. And these are companies whose full-time job is just to act as the trustee for other people's trusts. And they have a lot of licensing and certification and have fiduciary duties because they are held to a higher standard by the law, because they're expected to know how to be a really high-quality fiduciary. So if they mess up, it's very different than if you mess up, right? Because they're expected to be very well trained. Does that make sense?
I think so. So what I think you said is you're basically benchmarking to an existing subcluster of fiduciaries that are the ones that administer this exact type of state trust. And this is not coincidentally the type of state trust and the states where you're leveraging trust law for this novel business model. Is that kind of what you said?
That's exactly right.
That lines up perfectly. Thank you.
That's what we're starting with, and we hope to expand beyond that. Cool. Okay, well, I want to wrap it up and give folks a chance to feel free to converse with each other about some of these questions. Anything which is spurred, feel free to come and chat with me. But that's it.
Just want to thank for coming and for all of you and for use of this great space. It's really great to have Data here. Some additional meetups coming soon. What's the next one?
So the next one's next week, November 30th. It's on free law. Yep. So we've got Michael Lister, who has essentially been working for the last, I'd say, decade or more on basically liberating court records. Some of you may have heard of PACER, which is basically the US court sort of database for dockets, essentially, and he's been able to liberate all of that because it's behind a paywall, and he'll talk about that next week. And then we're going to have another.
We'll have some more exciting meetups coming up also. We've got some great themes. We're not quite ready to announce, but they'll be very interesting.
If any of you guys have also particular events, I mean, Raphael essentially came to us and said, I've got something cool I'd love to talk to the meetup about. So if you guys have, please reach out to Noah or myself. We'd be happy to make this venue and this forum available to all of you guys as well.
What about bumper stickers? Is there San Francisco legal hacker bumper stickers?
There are not yet.
Not yet, Daza. But you're volunteering. Thank you, Daza.
I don't care. I'll pay for the first batch, so long as you always give me.
All right, there will be bumper stickers.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nice job, buddy. Thank you.